Hello and welcome to Star Citizen Sunday. This is a weekly show which covers all the news from Star Citizen from the week just past. I am your host Mac, so let's get on with it. This week we see the progress on AI FPS, we check in to see how FOIP is coming along, plus Chris Roberts answers many of our burning questions in Reverse the Verse. So the first question for Calling All Devs is what changes are planned for the 600i? Obviously there's a lot kind of wrong with it at the moment. They said they have done some power tuning, which is in 3.2.1, but there are still issues when in atmosphere. The shields and the power plants are getting a big buff. They're no longer going to be medium sized, they're going up to large. They know the weapon placement isn't great, but that's not an easy fix, so it will take some time to do a rework at a later date. They're not updating the interior anytime soon. It doesn't sound like they intend to at all. They know it looks a bit barren, but they said it's more down to taste. Some people may like it, some people don't. But what they have learnt from the 600i will go into the 890 jump, and then they will take another look at the 600i from what they've done with the 890 and sort of swap things around. But don't expect too much of a massive interior change. It is kind of make or break, I think, for 600i owners, whether you like it or not, because I don't think it's going to drastically change too much. Next question is, when will missiles work? Now, they do want to make missiles less spammy. They want people thinking about which missiles to take for whatever job they want, learning the signatures and the type of missiles. They are on the list to be converted to Weapon 2.0 soon, but they're currently running on the old system, which is why there's a lot of issues with it. Some fixes will come into 3.3, things like locking multiple targets and the reliability of hitting, but not the complete system, so that will come at a later date. Next question, with quantum travel, will we be able to eventually filter points that show up, like filtering outposts, or maybe just space stations or moons? Now, they said that Chris Roberts really wants different iconography for the different types of locations. They are currently working on it now. They do want a filter as well. It will likely start on the Mobiglass, and then it will expand to ships and, the dedicated navigation seats or stations. It will eventually make it to those. But not just for travel points, for like economy reasons as well, so finding places that have a large supply of fuel or whatever. So final question, when can we expect dialogue driven purchasing, like buying drinks in a bar or guns from an armourer, like what we saw in Squadron 42's vertical slice over the counter sort of thing? Basically having some dialogue with a shopkeeper so that it feels more immersive. Now, they say they are focused currently on the bar experience. They're starting with drinks, ordering a beer, for example. Starting with the very simple items. Currently, they're experimenting with how the dialogue presents itself. Is it going to use inner thought, for example? And they're also trying to get the bar scene to feel realistic and busy, getting the bartender to look and feel right as well. Way in the future, he does say, when sort of black market dealings come in, they don't want it to just be shopping in a store or over a counter all the time, going down a back alley and finding some sort of fence or a dealer of certain shady goods, doing a transaction that way where the dialogue feels natural. They are working on it, and it'll be interesting to see these bars and how they feel. Anyway, that was Calling All Devs, guys. Let me know your thoughts, let's move on. So for the project update in and around the verse, they're working on some new tech to allow particle effects by external forces like wind, and we can see the demonstration on Hurston here, which should bring a bit more life and kinetic movement to planets like Hurston. One of the focuses for 3.3 is further improving the mining mechanic. They're improving the flow based on our feedback, especially adding more variation to the rocks and the risk of mining, and stopping the rock highlight when in third person. They also want to fix the network desync, which causes rock fragments to not be in the right position once you've fractured them, which is obviously very important. They've also created an asteroid mining prototype. You initiate your radar ping to locate the mineable asteroids, and then you engage in the mining process as you would for planetary mining. They did say that they found extracting in 0G quite challenging, but to be honest, it looks like it's going to be exactly the same on the ground as it is in space, but with an Orion, I'm sure it'll feel a lot more different. We got to see FOIP. They say it's coming along very well. This is face over IP, so when the webcam picks up your facial movements, and it'll move your character in-game as accurately as possible. They've got a lot of work done on the facial tracking system, just ensuring that the tracking is working well on all types of faces, so your skin tone, your facial hair, whether you wear glasses, etc. Making sure that the system also picks up as many facial expressions as possible, and they're currently working with Turbulent to create a back-end that can transport both the facial and the audio data across the network and distribute it to all the game clients. This, they say, is vital work needed to bring this feature to release, and I'm looking forward to that in 3.3, especially voice over IP. Face over IP is going to be fun, and it will look cool for role players, but it's not too important. I think voice over IP is super important, especially when playing with large groups. Anyway, the audio team have improved on what we heard last week in terms of props. Plus, they've supported sliding props and capturing new sounds via the Foley method, which we've seen a lot of them working on this. They're also creating the first pass at unique weapon audio sounds. We saw the Kana plasma rifle from Cossack Arms coming in 3.3. That looks, well, it sounds and looks very cool. And the Vandal energy lands we got to see as well. I have done a separate video on what we saw regarding the Vandal because it is quite interesting to see them in action. The link to that video will be below if you are interested. Now they're working on motion warping tech, which is a technique to take an animation driven motion and then stretch it to hit certain sync points. What this means is it makes the character move more naturally and logical when climbing or vaulting, setting off from the appropriate place rather than engaging too late or looking a bit odd. The animations for picking up and carrying items continues. They've completed the one-handed carryable items, which we saw a few weeks back. They're now looking at two-handed items. So they've got two types. They've got flat and cupped. Basically, whether you carry it by the side or underneath or with handles. It is always the little things that make the biggest difference, and being able to carry stuff around your ship or passing your shipmates on an Idris, for example, and seeing them carrying stuff around, it'll just look so cool. Anyway, to finish off with, they say the mission team continues work on FPS contracts and AI behaviours. They have done some early staging tests in a white box environment, and they say it's coming along very well. I can't wait to get some AI fights down on the planet, or even just any sort of gunfights will be fun. Anyway, that was Around the Verse, guys. Let's move on to Reverse the Verse. So this week's Reverse the Verse was a Q&A with the big man himself, Mr. Chris Roberts. First question was, what is your idea of the perfect dogfight in space? Now, Chris Roberts says that, yes, he's currently not happy with the state of flight. In atmosphere as well, the thrusters are a little OP. You can barely notice that there is an atmosphere. They don't want to go fully realistic as it can be too challenging and boring, but they're bringing balancing to thrusters. Ship personalities will be more distinctive, and they don't want ships to be able to adjust course as quickly as they do now. As he says, there's a lot of balancing coming in. There is a new IFCS version which works inside of the new item system and is fully multi-threaded and batched. A preview of this will likely come for CitizenCon coming at the end of the year. It's kind of more of a holistic design. Also, there's a new physics system which is getting a whole new refactor. It brings better performance, better scalability on the server and the client, and we'll be looking at a different rigid body system, which will be just so much more reliable than the old one. The atmospheric flight model will then also affect the ship performance. The current state is not accurate. Basically, they want it to be so that if you're flying an aerodynamic ship, you'll feel the benefits compared to if you're just flying a brick. They do want all ships to feel very distinctive. For example, the Jean ships, because of their verticality, may be able to strafe better, whereas the Hornet is more of a traditional dogfighting aircraft and should be flown as one. There's also a whole new cloth feature which they are working on. Didn't see any of this, but he says we may see some of that at CitizenCon as well. So next question, do you like how the quarterly releases are going? And he says yes, it gives the team a focus on delivering the features. Also, it makes it easier to determine whether things are on track and keeps the game so much more stable. He also said it's good to keep the community happy. It feels like they're making progress. We enjoy it when it comes. And although there is a bit of downtime after a few weeks or a month, let's say, it picks it back up again. Now, there is something he did point out in his letter, but I'll mention it here. The Quarter 3 release, which is 3.3, was due for the end of September, but with its proximity to CitizenCon being 10 days after, they don't want to take people away from what they are working on to do something fancy to show people at CitizenCon. So what they'll do is they'll just release 3.3 around the time of CitizenCon and ensure that there's interesting things to show off from there. Now, many of you may see this as them not sticking to their releases, and that's understandable, but this does kind of make sense. I feel like these releases are more important than the events, especially for consistency and keeping on track with their goals. So I'm happy for this to happen. So do expect much of what we see at CitizenCon to be 3.3, like Hurston, object container streaming, lots of things like AI, hopefully. But this is the plan for the future. They didn't really think about it too much when they first started doing these dates. But Q1 will be March, Q2 release will be June, Q3 will be October, and then Q4 end of the year. So it's only the Q3 patch that is moving, everything else stays the same. They've also done this because the Q1 and the Q4 releases are much smaller releases, whereas the Q2 and 3 contain the majority of the updates, and due to staff morale and motivation as well, it just makes sense to have it that way. Anyway, next question is to do with ship renting in the PU. Are we still on track for 3.3? Now, he says they are wanting to get renting and purchasing of ships in 3.3, but they're making no promises. I hope that the extra 10 days may be a bit of a help there. It is the intention still, and they do want all items and all ships purchasing and renting into the game to create the proper persistent loop. It does depend on the economy balancing as well, as they don't want to have to wipe the servers every patch, which I think is a good idea. If you spend a lot of time earning enough to get a large ship, and then, you know, a few days later they bring out a new patch and you lose it all again, and you have to start again, it'll be very frustrating. Getting to a persistent state as soon as possible, being closer to the proper game loop, is very important, and I think it's a good touch. I like that idea. So next question, what's the next milestones that you're looking forward to? Obviously speaking to Chris. Object container streaming is one of the main ones to allow them to expand the world. They've got a lot of work to do, and the undertaking of this is bigger than the move that they did to the large world 64-bit. After the physics update later on comes the server meshing. Now, they said that object container streaming should allow them to increase the player count to around 200 per server, and then when server meshing comes, it should allow them, well, everyone to exist on one server, which would be phenomenal. So it looks like 3.3 may bring an increase in player count. That'll be nice. Next question is, Hurston has water. What happens to the first iteration of water? Do we get to swim, etc.? And he says it's not coming with 3.3. There will be oceans and water, but they're unsure as to what will happen to the player on the first release. Basically, they can't decide whether you bounce off it, whether you die instantly. The swimming and water interactions are on the backlog of features needed. Ship buoyancy is part of the physics system, which will get sorted once the new physics update comes. But 3.3 will just be the visual side of things, working on the shoreline rendering and the wave simulation or tessellation. The backlog, if you don't know, is just a long list of things that need to be completed. A lot of stuff that gets prioritized is needed for Squadron 42. So next question is, what incentives are there going to be to encourage players on ships to wear clothes instead of always walking around in armor and EVA suits? An excellent question. Now, this is actually one of Chris Roberts' pet peeves, and I'm glad to hear this. He wants the use of suits and helmets to only be used when appropriate. You won't likely be able to sit in many of the ship stations, like the pilot seat, while wearing armor. But also, wearing helmets may affect your stamina in some way, or your communication skills in some way. Inventory, he said, is also going to be a physically based inventory. This is the reason why there are lockers on the ships. You won't have a magical inventory bag where you can just carry out everything that you collect. You can only use what you have on you. Lots more player status things will come, like drinking, eating, washing. These will affect and assist along the idea of not constantly wearing suits, and he doesn't want landing zones to be where people just run around in armor all the time. And I have to agree completely with this. I like the idea when you're on a ship, especially like a bigger ship, a multi-crew ship, walking around and seeing your crewmates and talking to them without having your helmet on and so forth just makes more sense. It wouldn't be like that in the real world, so there is an incentive. You'll leave them in the locker, and if you need to get to them quick, like if you get a decompression, you can run, you can put it on, and then you can escape. Same goes for landing zones. They don't want people walking around in full armor suits and battle suits. It needs to feel more realistic than that. Talking of decompressions, what's happening with the mechanics for this? We saw a video a while ago, and they got a little video showing the progress of decompressions. Now, it is currently on hold as the programmer is very busy with what's going on in the physics and IFCS and object container streaming, but they do have the room system working, and we can see from this video it's showing everything getting sucked out, and it looks very good for a work in progress. He did say it's a very early prototype. It will be a little slower than that when the door begins to open. It won't just be once the door's fully open it kicks in, but it's looking like it's coming along well. Now, some other points that Chris Roberts made is that the roadmap will continue to be a year ahead. They're in the process now of re-evaluating it. They want to break down the features on the roadmap to be more like sub-features and so on, rather than just this. Professions for 3.3 was a little overkill, especially as they have to focus on object container streaming, which is why we saw them get pushed back. Yes, there will be a Squadron 42 roadmap. That is still the intention, but it's not going to be today or tomorrow or anytime in the very near future. And also, Vulcan support is on hold. The engine team is obviously working full steam ahead on the object container streaming. They're finishing off the GPU skinning and also working on the DNA face tech. That will hopefully roll out in 3.4, 3.5, and we will likely see more at CitizenCon. Anyway, that was the Q&A with Chris Roberts. Extremely happy to hear about his incentives for suits and helmets and being able to walk around in clothing instead of armor all the time. Plus, it's nice to hear what they have in mind for the IFCS, ship purchasing and so forth, although it doesn't sound like, we can't tell if ship purchasing is going to be in with 3.3. I'm a bit sketchy as to whether they'll make it with that one. Anyway, that was our TV, guys. Let's move on. So also this week, we had a new Mining Rocks post. This is an in-law Schumann Interstellar employee newsletter. Always fun to read that. July's monthly report is available. I will cover this in a separate video later this next week though, so do keep an eye out for that one. And finally, Chris Roberts wrote a letter addressing some of our concerns. He spoke about Alpha 3.3 getting pushed 10 days back to line up with CitizenCon, like I mentioned earlier. He also explained the reasons why the video content has changed, which again we've heard about this and the intentions for that. And also he addressed about the removal of the UEC purchasing cap. I do highly suggest you take a read of this if you have not yet. It's always worth to keep up with that info. So that brings us to the end of the show. Thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss a video. Hit that thumbs up if you enjoyed it and share the video with all your friends. If you like what I do and want to help me make it better, follow the link below to my Patreon page to learn more.